I am discussing about the Indigo case law, sir. Indigo case law is a case which is primarily debated on the issue of the capital receipt versus revenue receipt. And how this case law is important here. The background of the case law is that Indigo is the low-cost airline company which operate the budget aircraft here. We know all these things. We must have traveled in the Indigo Airlines here. And it has entered into an agreement for the purchase of 100 aircrafts from a company in France that is called Airbus. As per this, after this agreement was entered, LOI was entered here, they have entered into another agreement with the IEA, that is called the company which is supplying the machine for the purpose of this aircraft. And when they have supplied the machines for the purpose of aircraft, they have passed on certain credits to the SSC, and this credit was treated in the books of account, and the SSC has treated the books in the credit by reducing the rental for the purpose of rental when they are paying that they are paying to the lessor here in this case. After this machine which was purchased or which was purchased from the IEA, this machine was built into the aircraft, and after this aircraft was leased to the SSC through lessor, and thus this transaction was called as a operating lease, where the lessor was the owner of the asset, lessee was the Indigo, and the lessee was paying the rental, monthly rental, as well as the supplementary rental. We will also discuss this part for the purpose of using the aircraft in India. The issue has arisen that due to the credit scheme, they have received around 759.39 crores. Out of 759.39 crores, the 268.91 crore was proportionate for this year. And since it was proportionate for this year, this credit which was received in cash was reduced from the lease rental charges and therefore shown as the other income. The SSC claimed that this lease rental of 268.91 crore is not subject to tax because it is a capital receipt. This case is started from the year 2007-8, which was the first year, and after in each of the year, it has traveled to the ITAT before this bench here, and here the bench is discussing a lot of issues involved into this case here. When the matter went to the assessing officer asked that why this capital receipt, and this is the assessment for the 2011-12. So SSC explains that since 2007-8, these type of transactions are taking place. And in the case of the 2007-8, when the matter was before the tribunal has already upheld that this transaction is in the nature of capital receipt. The SSC relied upon the famous case of the Sani Steel and Pony Sugar, which was from the Supreme Court, which talks about when a subsidy can be a capital receipt or a revenue receipt here. He also stated that for the assessment year 2007-2008, this just hold on, sir. For the assessment year 2002 to 2008, the case has already been decided by the ITAT in favor of the SSC, and therefore, in order to maintain the consistency, the AO should also accept his submission. The AO was of the view, since that SSC didn't purchase the aircraft, but it has taken the aircraft on the lease, and the depreciation was claimed by the lessor and not by the lessee, so therefore was not inclined to give the relief to understand that this 2.286.91 crore is a capital receipt. He was of the view that 268.91 crore was of the subsidy which is covered under the section 43(1) explanation 10, and therefore he didn't agree with the SSC contention and treated it as a revenue receipt. Further, he also disallowed the rental which was being paid to the SSC by the SSC to the lessor on account of non-deduction of the TDS, saying that this rental is not part of the section 1015A, which is a special section giving the exemptions to the foreign party who is giving the aircraft on the lease here. We will be discussing that on 1015, and saying that this income is not covered under the 1015. Therefore, this income will be subject to tax in India. And once this income is taxable in India, the issue of the 40AI, that is the TDS issue, will come, and the TDS has not been deducted. Whereas the SSC was arguing that up to the March 2007, this income was covered under 1015A. However, after that March 2007, when this provision went into the sunset clause, we have the Article 8 of the India-Ireland Treaty, because the lessor are sitting in the Ireland, and therefore, as per the India-Ireland Treaty, lessor, which is a special Article 8, deals with the special provision for the purpose of the income from the operation of the aircraft. And here we have seen that the rental income has been included in the India-Ireland Treaty after this part. So they were of the view that Article 8, through the Article 8, the income of the foreign lessor will not be taxable in India. India has given up the rights. It will only taxable in Ireland, and therefore it will not be taxable. However, the AO was of the contention that this rental will be covered under the Article 12 of the India-Ireland Treaty, whereas also was part of this, was important to understand that for the purpose of definition of the royalty under the India-Ireland Treaty, this rental from the aircraft was especially excluded. However, the AO was of the view that it should be covered under the under the rental, which under the term royalty for the purpose of DTA, and therefore that should be taxed in India. So AO was of the view, and AO has disallowed this amount of 268.91 crore. However, when this matter went to the CIT appeal, there was a totally U-turn, there was a totally different perspective into this one. CIT accepted, yes, it is a capital receipt, but it is subject to the capital gain. And CIT says that this, not only this 268.91 crore, but also the 759.39 crore, all the amounts is subject to the capital gain, because the SSC has transferred its right to purchase the aircraft to a lessor, and this transfer of the invisible rights will amount to the capital gain. And further, since there was no cost of the acquisition, so therefore all the amount will be taxable. This is the first contention of the CIT appeal. So CIT appealed to the view that it is part of the capital gain. The second view of the CIT took that the expenditure which was of the rental, which was in the nature of rental, that rental expenditure which also will not allowed, because it is for the purpose of the capital receipt. So therefore section 37 will not cover this type of expenditure, and that will also not allowed. Based on this part here, the department was also aggrieved. Department was also aggrieved because the CIT appeal has held that it is a capital receipt. So therefore, the department was also aggrieved. The SSC was aggrieved. So both has filed the case before the ITT. So when the matter went to the ITT, let's see what has happened in the ITT and before the division bench. Before the division bench, it was contended by the SSC. What was the SSC contention was that SSC argued that it is a covered matter in the case of the SSC case itself in the assessment year 2007-8, 2008-9, and 9-10. Further, the revenue has appealed against the High Court, the revenue has appealed against the order of the tribunal before the High Court, and the matter was admitted in the High Court on the only one ground, and that was on the treatment of whether it is a capital receipt or revenue receipt. No perversity has been raised by the revenue. The issue of the supplemental rent was not raised before the High Court. In fact, High Court has not admitted this appeal on the issue of the supplemental rent here. No connection between the credits and lease transactions, as both are independent. The SSC pleads that there is no connection between the SSC credits and the lease transactions. Third part, the SSC contains that the section 28.1 and 28.4 is also not applicable, because this issue was not raised in the first appeal, but it was raised through the additional grounds also, additional appeal, the additional grounds of law. So the SSC is dealing with, says that no, 28.1 and 24 is not applicable. And it also says the issue of the supplemental rent is covered in his own case, as well as the Sahara Airlines case of the ITAT, which was reported in the 83 ITT 11. So these are the few arguments before the special bench, before the division bench here. Now see what happens, how the division bench takes the cases here. The division bench, yes, what the revenue argument is before the division bench. Division bench says that earlier order is erroneous. The revenue argues that the earlier order was erroneous because the complete set of fact was not before the tribunal, and therefore it is not binding. So he challenged the binding principles of the ITT order when says that the binding principle says that order of the DB is binding to the another bench of the DB. Here as a revenue takes the exception, says that this binding order is not applicable here because this binding order is erroneous. The order is erroneous and it on the fallacious grounds here. Why? It says that the complete set of the document was not available before the honorable bench. Therefore, all the issues has not been discussed in the order of the tribunal. Therefore, it should not be considered as a binding cases. For this purpose, the revenue cites some of the case law, like distributors case law. After that, he says that Pony Sugar and Sony Sugar case, Sony Steel case is not applicable in this case, because in the case of the Pony Sugar and Sony Steel, the discussion was on the issue of subsidy, which is from the government. And since it is a commercial transaction, it cannot be held with subsidy here from the government. So therefore, the outcome of the Pony Sugar or the principle of the Pony Sugar and Sony Steel was not applicable in this case, because SSC is more relying on the purpose test coming out from the Pony Sugar and Sony Steel case. However, the revenue says no, it will not be applicable. The credit can be discount or post-sale warranty. It says that since the credit is for the purpose of the business purpose, so it should be treated as the discount or the post-sale warranty, and therefore it should be subject to taxation. ITT also said that the ITT reliance on the AS12, Accounting Standard 12, is also fallacious because it deals with the government grants and subsidy. Here, the fact of the case is that it is not a government grant, but it is a credit which is arising due to the commercial transactions between the two private party, and therefore it will not be covered under the accounting standard 12. Fourth, the recipient from the receipt from the commercial transactions therefore are subject to the capital gain also. So revenue argument is like this one. Based on this part here, based on this argument from both the sides, what happens? The division bench make a reference to the president of the ITT for the transfer of this case to the special bench. And this division bench says that they cannot go contrary to the established ruling or established principles. that one bench cannot go against the order of the other bench unless there is a bench, larger bench. And for this purpose, they rely upon the case law of the Sayaji Steel and Sayaji Iron and Steel 253 ITR 749 and Agarwal Warehousing Steel 257 ITR 235. These are the important provisions to understand here. When a matter can be referred by a DB to a special bench or to a larger bench here, we have to state that the principles of the here, we are taking the exceptions of the binding principles, and the ITAT is transferring the case from a DB, that is the division bench, to a special bench. And this argument has taken place before this DB bench here. And I go to the argument before the SB, special bench, let me read about the case law, which of the Sayaji talks about. What is the Sayaji case law is there, and what is the Sayaji case law talks about. Sayaji Iron and Ispikat, Iron and Engineering case law talks about what is the operative para is that the tribunal in fact had no right to come to a conclusion contrary to one reached by the another bench of the same tribunal on the same fact. If the tribunal wanted to take an opinion different from one taken by the earlier bench, it ought to place the matter before the president of the tribunal, and so that he could have the case referred to the bench consisting of 3 or more members, or the which are and which for which there was a provision in the Income Tax Act itself. So, if the bench wants to take a contrary view from the view which has been taken by the earlier bench, then the bench has to refer this matter to the president of the ITAT, and the president will constitute a special bench. So it is the issue of the judicial propriety. It is the issue of the law of precedent that we have to follow here. Similarly, in the case of the Agarwal Warehousing, the Madhya Pradesh High Court was dealing with this type of cases, and it has held that the tribunal has no power to review its own decision. Judicial discipline and propriety demand that if the tribunal wants to take an opinion different from one taken in the earlier bench, it ought to place the matter before the Honorable President bench of the tribunal so that he can refer the matter to the larger bench. So we have to understand the power of the tribunal here. Once the matter has been decided by the one bench, that the decision will be binding, unless if there is a contrary view has to be taken, the matter has to be referred to the larger bench here. Now, so with this, the matter was referred to the larger bench, and when we refer to the larger bench, the 4 questions of law that was framed by the larger bench, and the larger bench is trying to answer all these 4 questions here. First question is that whether the FIA, that is the credit from the IEA, that is the FIA means Fleet Introductory Assistance from the IAA or others, because it is not the IAA is giving, the others has also given the credit to the SSC, are capital receipt or revenue receipt. So the main question is containing whether this receipt is a capital receipt or revenue receipt. Where such capital receipt is covered under 28.1 or 28.4. The second question which has been there. Third point that is coming here, whether this capital receipt is liable to capital gain and disallowances under section 37 can be justified. And fourth was there, whether the TDS provision will be applicable for the transaction of the payment of these lease rental as well as the supplemental lease rental, and whether the TDS provision will be attracted or not. So these are the 4 questions that has been framed by the ITAT special bench. Now, let's see, very much important now, that what happens before the special bench. SSC arguments, how the SSC places arguments. SSC arguments is that it is a capital receipt and it relies upon its own order of the same ITAT of the division bench in the last 4 years, 2007-8, 2008-9, 2009-10, 2010-11. and also relies upon the purpose test, which was propounded by the Supreme Court in the Sahani Steel as well as the Pune Sugars here. So the purpose test is very much important. What is the purpose for which the credit was given, and how the credit was given, that is not important. What is the purpose? And this purpose has to be tested at the time when the right to receive the credit was there. He also says, going through the Palkiwala and Kanga and Palkiwala book, saying that certain consideration which has been discussing on the deciding the certain considerations which are not applicable for the deciding the whether this receipt is the revenue receipt and the capital receipt. Such consideration which is mentioned in the Kanga and Palkiwala books are that Kanga and Palkiwala in the page number 214 says that these are the considerations, are immaterial considerations for in deciding the questions whether the certain item is a capital or revenue. What are these considerations? Payment measured by the estimated profit, lump sum and periodic sums, magnitude of the receipt, name given by the party, concern in the treatment of accounts, form of transaction, income from vesting assets, payment made out of capital, and disallowances of the payer. There are a few things which has been mentioned in the books here. I am not noted down. And after that, it says that no, these are matters not to be considered here. Further, it says, which is very much important, the right to receive the credit accrues when the agreement was entered with the IEA, and that was the 18th of the October 2005, and it is not linked with the subsequent assignment of this agreement to the lessor. So it says that the moment I have entered into an agreement with the IEA, the right to receive the credit has been passed on to me. After this, I have entered into the agreement with the aircraft person, that Airbus. The Airbus will install this machine into the Airbus for the purpose of supply to me. And after that, I have entered this agreement with the purpose of, for the purpose of financing with the lessor, and the lessor has financed all this part here. And whatever the amount the lessor has passed, these are totally independent and not interconnected. It further says that it is not a discount because it is a credit I have not purchased. It is not a discount because I have not negotiated any rate with the IEA. It is the rate has been discussed by the Airbus. I have just confirmed that I want the engine from the IEA. The moment I have confirmed that I want the engine from the IEA, I have got the credit. The pricing of the engine has not been discussed with me and the IEA. The pricing of the engine is subject to discussion with the IEA and the Airbus. Further, it says that it is not a subsidy also. Why this is not a subsidy? It relies upon the Ambika Mill case and a similar issue, because the revenue was relying on the Ambika Mill case. It says that Ambika Mill case was under the Payment of Bonus Act, not under the Income Tax Act. So therefore, it should not be treated as subsidy. Further, most important thing was there, revenue was trying to give a color with a picture that all these agreements are a composite agreement. This agreement has been entered for the purpose of colorable devices. Says that then the SSC argues that these are the not a colorable devices. These are the separate transactions for the purpose of purchasing the aircraft, purchasing for the purpose of installing the particular machine engine into this aircraft, and after this lessor and lessee agreement, whereas the lessor is this agreement is under the operating lease. Further, it says that the 28(1) and 24 is not applicable. Why the 28(1) and 24 is not applicable? Mafatlal case is an important case which talks about the, I will discuss each cases thoroughly. In each cases, the Mafatlal case was there, the payment, it should be a non-monetary consideration. Here the SSC said that amount of the credit is a monetary consideration. Since it is a monetary consideration, so therefore it should not be part of the 28(4) per se. We will discuss the 28 here. The 28(4) talks about that it should be not be part of the 28(4). SSC argument is again is going that no allegation of the SAM transaction. Why it is because it was never allegated against the SSC that since 2007-8 that it's a SAM transaction. This SAM transaction was taking argument first time before the tribunal, before the special bench here. So it says that till the same transaction is being taken place, this contention was never taken at any stage, either by the AO or the CIT appeal or by the DR into the past cases here, that these transactions are SAM transactions. These transactions are not a SAM transactions. Reductions of the further, it says that one more thing is that when the matter went to the CIT, the SSC didn't give the SSC when gave the agreement, he just erased the figure. The figure was erased on account of to maintain the confidentiality part only. He says that all these documents are available with the AO, and the CIT can obtain this figure. But SSC has erased the figure because of the confidentiality, and also saying that this information is sensitive for the pricing sensitive, so therefore it has erased this part here. SSC also claimed that SR, which was the supplementary rent, the SSC claimed that prior to it was covered under the 1015A, and after that it is covered under the Article 8 of the India-Ireland DTA. Article 12 is not covered as the aircraft has been excluded from the definition of the royalty for the purpose of Article 12 of the India-Ireland Treaty. And tribunal has no power to enhance the assessment here. And for this purpose, it relies upon the MCOP Globe Private Limited. These are the sum and substance of the SSC argument. Now come to the revenue argument. Revenue relied on the various document and agreement. Revenue says that transactions are composite, colorable. It was a well in advance that plan to enter into the lease agreement. It being a pure accounting terms, it can be linked to be a capital asset or revenue. The SSC has not purchased any capital asset. It says that since the SSC has entered into the lease transaction, it has not purchased any capital asset. So therefore, it is not a capital receipt here. Credit are in the nature of discount and also commission. Very much important thing. The allegation is that the SSC has received the commission for the purpose of facilitating the sale of the engine by the IAE to the Airbus. So therefore, one allegation was there that credit is in the nature of discounts, and also it can be commission also. Created the rental, and after that, what has happened? When the amount was received, the proportionate amount was created against the rental. It says that, and the amount was treated as a revenue received in the books. So the argument of the department says that the treatment in the books cannot be different with the treatment under the Income Tax Act, and because the SSC has taken this as a other income in the books, and therefore it should be treated as a revenue receipt and not as a capital receipt. Revenue argument is also there that Sony Steel and the Pony Sugar are not applicable. It is a pure commercial transactions and can be discount, or most important, or it can be post-sale warranty like this one. Credit not only linked with the selection of the engine, but also the sales of the aircraft, aircraft and subsequent event also. There cannot be any term as a capital receipt. Vital information was not given to the CIT appeal. CIT appeal was right in the capital gain as the capital asset was transferred to the lessor. Why saying that it was the right to receive the aircraft was an invaluable, intangible right, and the SSC has transferred this right to the lessor in favor of the lessor, and so therefore is a capital gain, and the credit is informed the lessor is the capital gain is subject to capital gain. And it also says the SR is not a rental, but it is a reimbursement. SR has a different treatment here. I will also discuss the SR part separately, because supplementary rent, what is the supplementary rent? Whether it can be covered under the 1015. Earlier it was held in the SSC case that yes, supplementary rent can be covered under the 1015A, but the department says that no, supplementary rent cannot be covered because it is a reimbursement of the expenses. What expenses? Repair and maintenance expenses. And transaction is not covered. And the fourth allegation is that transaction is not covered under 1058 and covered under the Article 12. And therefore, it is taxable in India because it is coming into the term of royalty and TDS is required. And since the SSC has not deducted the TDS, so all the expenses should be disallowed. So these are the sum and substance of the argument before the special bench. Now I will go to how the special bench has dealt all this issue, and let's see, very interesting issue will come with the special bench here. A special bench has dealt this issue by discussing all this issue, and they have discussed in various paragraphs. First is that they have discussed what is the nature of the receipt, whether the agreement and transactions are separate or a composite, purpose and nature of the credit and receipt and its taxability. C part is very much important. What is the outcome? Relevance of the entry in the books of account, whether the entries in the books of account is determinative for the purpose of taxability. Issue of reduction of the amounts. As I mentioned that when the document was submitted before the CIT appeal, the amount was erased here. So how to deal with this part here? Issue of 28.1 and 28.4, whether it is a capital gain, disallowances under section 37, and most important, disallowances of the supplementary receipts and the TDS issue. These are the few important points where the ITT has held. And let's go to each of the issues here. On the first part, it talks about the nature of the receipt. It says that if you go through the ITAT, going through the various agreement, has held that the credit was received for the selection of engine of the IAE, and therefore the credit is not a subsidy. It says that although, first of all, there was a LOI which was placed before the Airbus, and when the Airbus gives an option to select the engine, and the moment you select the engine, the credit passes onto the SSC. So therefore, it says that the credit which are received for the selection of engine only from the IA, as therefore is not a subsidy. It is only for the choice of the engine which was, and the credit was given per engine. The credit was given. So first of all, is very much important. When the SSC has entered or has picked up IEA that yes, I will install this engine, the SSC has not discussed any pricing part with the IEA. SSC has just only selected this IEA for the purpose of this engine. The pricing was between the IEA and the Airbus. The pricing was never negotiated between the IEA and the SSC, and therefore it says that the credit was given by the IEA. It cannot be a subsidy because no agreement, nothing was discussed about the pricing part of the SSC, pricing part with the SSC. There is no buy-sell agreement between the IEA and SSC. No pricing, as I mentioned that there was no buy-sell agreement. The credit was for the selection of IEA engine only. Pricing has already decided between the Airbus and IEA. CIT appeal has upheld the view that the price was not discussed between the IEA and SSC. The price between SSC and price between IEA and Airbus was not known to the SSC, and there was no automatic credit. And therefore, the first view of the ITT was that this credit is not a subsidy, and therefore it has gone into the nature of the receipt. And from the nature of receipt, it has found that this amount of the credit is not in the nature of subsidy here. Let's go to the other issue which the court has discussed here. Other issue is that whether this agreement just hold on. I have to go back here. Something is there. Whether this agreement is a composite or independent agreements. Since the allegation of the colorable agreement or colorable arrangement was there, so therefore SSC was bound to reply all these issues, and SSC replied that there was three agreements. One was the LOI with the Airbus, one was with the agreement with the IAA, and other was for the purpose of the agreement with the Airbus. And this argument has taken place on a totally different date. There was not on the same date here. And there was no SAM or dubious colorable transaction. It takes place as per the industry practice in the airlines industries here. And Supreme Court, the SSC has also relied on the Bhagat construction case, 250 ITR 291. What is the Bhagat construction case? I will discuss the Bhagat construction case, that how this SSC is there. Just hold on, sir. Yes. The Bhagat construction case, it was held that a colorable transaction is one which is seemingly valid, but in a freezed or counterfeit transactions entered into for some ulterior purpose. In conclusion about the nature of transaction is whether a colorable or otherwise, it's supposed to be by material or evidence is essentially one of the fact. So it is the fact that will take to understand whether this transaction is colorable or not colorable. So therefore, the SSC argues that these transactions are not a colorable transactions. And further, the ITAT also relies upon the Daulat Ram case here. What is the Daulat Ram case? That it says that in the Daulat Ram case, it was held that the onus of proving that the apparent was not real is not on the party who claims to be so, even under section 91 and 92 of the Indian Evidence Act. Why the 91 and 92 of the Indian Evidence Act is material, which talks about the best evidence principles and which talks about the superior evidence versus inferior evidence here. And we will discuss this part here when the agreement was placed before the tribunal or before the court here. All the agreements are independent agreement, and these agreements will speak of itself. If there is no infirmity in the agreements here, it cannot lead to a conclusion that these agreements are the SAM transactions here. So let's discuss what was happened in the case of the in the case of the Mullah Sakari and Sahakar, that was the company cases. It was held that the document is well known, must primarily be construed on the basis of the terms and conditions contained therein. It is also tried that while construing the documents, the court shall not apply the words which the author thereof did not use. It has been held that surrounding circumstances are relevant for the construction document only if an ambiguity exists therein, it is not otherwise. So when there is an ambiguity will exist, then only you can go to this other part here. We know that in the case of the principles of on the preponderance of the probability, unless there is an ambiguity exists, you cannot go to the you cannot go to the principle of preponderance. We have to rely upon the evidence which is placed before us here. Section 90 and 92 one is based evidence rule that we can discuss here. Now, which is the most critical part of the judgment is that purpose and nature of the credit and the purpose of the nature of the credit. What is the purpose of the nature of credit? Whether this credit is a capital receipt or a revenue receipt, this is the most important judgment here. It says that till 2009, it was it was stated that credit was for the purpose of choosing the or selecting the IA engines. However, now the revenue content, no, the credit is for the purpose of the purchase of engine as well as the purchase of the aircraft. Then after that, the court discussed about the ITAT practices. What is the IAT practices, which is very much important for this purpose here. And I will discuss these IAT practices in the traveling industry, in the airline industries, how the credit flows here. And IAT practices has been discussed in the paragraph 33. I'm just reading. What is the what is the practice of the IATA? Let's see for the purpose of airlines here. It says that it is common for the airlines to receive credit from the aircraft or the engine manufacturer to incentivize the purchase. So it is the industry practices. These credits comes in various forms, including guaranteed trade-in values, spare part supports, marketing supports, training support, and introduction of cost their support. The accounting treatment will depend upon the subsistence of the credit given. The vast majority of the airlines indicate their financial statement that they offset this credit, where they are in substance rebates of discount against the aircraft cost capitalized and do not recognize them in the revenue in the income statement. There may be some additional complexity when the credits are given to be used in the future aircraft purchase based on the current purchase. Whether the credit is more accurately considered related to the purchase to the current or future purchase needs to be evaluated. And after that, say the credit may be monetary and non-monetary also. So the ITAT goes into the industry practice, how the industry, whether the credit is a unique transaction here or credit is a common transaction. Then you understand that yes, credit is a common transaction in the aviation industry, in the traveling industries here. Tax department cannot ignore the commercial reality. It is very much important. We have seen that that department goes or encroaches the role of the SSE. It says that tax department should not ignore the commercial realities, and for this purpose, it further relies upon the various cases law. One of the case law which is there, very much important case law which has been discussed in the vending works here, which was relied by the learned special counsel of the SSE. It was held that the nature of a receipt may be according to the nature of the trade in connection with which it arises. So it is based on the nature of the trade in which it arises. It was held that the case, it was held in that case, since that the price of the sale of factories ordinarily is a capital receipt, but it may income receipt in the case person whose business is to buy and sell the factories. In the instant case, SSE before us is engaged in the business of running the low-cost airlines. Its source of the revenue is driving the income from passenger and cargo transporters. The SSE is not engaged in the other business of trading an aircraft and the business of receiving credit. Since it is not into the business of receiving credit, it is into the low-cost airlines of the carrying the passengers and cargo. Therefore, it's not into the business transaction, and these receipts are not a revenue receipts here. And after that, the ITAT also discussed about the fixed capital versus circulating capitals. And for this purpose, it has also discussed some of the case laws, what is the fixed capital and how the circulating capital. Hoshiarpur case is one of the important case where the ITAT has discussed a complete part here. I will like to read the few lines of the Hoshiarpur case here. It is admitted that the SSE in this instant case is the business of operating the low-cost airlines. Therefore, the aircraft are capital assets. Very much important. It's established the aircraft are the capital assets and not a circulating capital. Here, the ITAT's finding is very clear. It uses the aircraft to earn revenue. The credit received are not derived from the business activity, which is to earn revenue from the passenger and the cargo transportation, which is a vital fact. Distinction is crucial as to highlight the Honorable Supreme Court in the Vendang, that is the case here. What happened in the case of the Hoshiarpur cases? In view of the nature of the business current of SSC is relevant. In the case of the Hoshiar puts, it was held that, which was relied upon by learned special counsel of SSC, the relevant wherein the Honorable Supreme Court has observed as under. The SSC was in the license of electricity undertaking. In the year of accounting year of 1947 to March 30, 1948, SSC received some amount for new service connection granted to the customer. On the account spent on the laying of service lines, it was held that it was a revenue receipt, but the court finding was that it was not a revenue receipt, but it was a capital receipt here. And one more important point that is coming is the receipt is related to the business or incidental to the business. If it is incidental to the business, then it can be said that it is a revenue receipt. If it is not incidental to the business, then it cannot be a revenue receipt. Legal principle of purpose test, which was established in the Pony Sugar case and the Swaney Sugar case, was relied to hold that this kit which was received by the SSC are not a revenue receipt, but it's a capital receipt. These are the important finding of the SSC in this case, of the ITT in this case here. I'm just reading the relevant para of this finding here, where the ITT has come to a finding here. Therefore, in this case, the amount received to start was by the revenue in character, but not in income at the stage of receipt. However, the subsequent event was not that of a different quality, was imprinted on the receipt. And the court comes to a conclusion in the page number 454 of the order that the amount of 759 crore which was received by the SSC from the IA is under consideration of the engine is a capital receipt and not a revenue receipt here. Based on the the ITT has primarily relied on this para itself, and the main thing is that it has relied upon the Sani Steel and the Pony Sugar cases here to say that these are not the revenue receipts here. Now, what happens? What is the treatment in the books of account and what is the treatment in the ITR? The court says that the treatment in the books of account is totally irrelevant. The books of account may have been prepared based on the certain accounting principles. Yes, I will go into this para. Yes, is totally irrelevant, and for this purpose, they have gone to the different case law. When the issue of 28 and 24 was raised, this grounds was taken as an additional ground, and we all know that in the case of NTPC, we always cite before the ITT that additional grounds of law is allowed when the complete fact is already available with the ITT. We always plead that these are the additional grounds of law and it can be taken. And the ITT, in every cases I have seen before the tribunal, they allow if the additional grounds of law is there, if the complete fact is already on the record here. And when the revenue raised the issue of 28.1 and 28.4, the ITT has allowed this additional ground. And it has also cited that Mahindra and Mahindra case and Jindal Equipment case, saying that these receipts are not to be covered under the 28.1 or 28.4. And for the purpose, he cites the Mafatlal case, that it is not a case of the monetary receipt. It is not the case of non-monetary receipt. So therefore, it is also not covered under the Mafatlal case. Mafatlal case was on the non-monetary receipt. On the issue of the commissions, ITT has also said that it is not a commission here because the business of the SSC is not to facilitate the IA for the purpose of selling the engines to the Airbus. Now, very much important part, what happens to the capital gain? Whether there was a capital gain, because these are the allegation was from the CIT level, it was not an allegation from the SSAO level. CIT has changed that. CIT was on the impression that it is a capital receipt, but it is subject to the capital gain. So he says that it is not a capital gain, and so because first of all, there was no right which was transferred to the lessor. Lessor has not paid any consideration. There was no the assignment was at the par value. Whatever the SSC got the right to purchase the aircraft, it simply seated given the right that okay, you purchase. It has approached to the lessor because it does not have the fund. So it has approached to the lessor that you purchase, and after that lease it to me. So therefore it says that it is not a transfer of any right. It is not at all a transfer of any, or there was no capital asset was there. Subsequently, there cannot be no deduction under 37 since the installment or since the release rental was paid, which was necessary for the business of the SSC. So therefore, there cannot be any disallowances under section 37. And therefore, it has relied upon the Bharat seat versus JCIT case. There are other cases also. I am just concluding to my part here. Another issue of that, supplementary rent and TDS. This is perhaps the last issue. Supplementary rent was observed that it was not part of the lease rent, but it is a part of the reimbursement of the maintenance. The court, the ITAT, relying upon its own order of the 2000-2008 and the subsequent order and the order of the Sahara airline cases, has come to a conclusion that whatever that, and based on the fact of the transaction, that the supplementary lease rent, supplementary rent is also a rent, is not an interest, or it is not an royalty. It is also a rent, which is a rent, and that is a mandatory rent, because the moment the SSC will not pay this rent, the transaction will be cancelled, and the lessor can call back their aircraft, and therefore the consequences are heavy. And these supplementary rent is for the purpose of additional flight hours. So therefore, these rents are important. These rents are not a reimbursement, because the reimbursement are if you are paying the SR and after the supplementary rent is being paid, there may be some maintenance, there may not be some maintenance, but the payment of supplementary rent is mandatory. Yes, if there will be some maintenance, then out of the supplementary rent, the lessor will reimburse the maintenance cost. But the supplementary rent is not contingent, where the maintenance can be contingent. Further, they have the right to cancel the lease rent here. They have the right to cancel this agreement. Most important part was the Supreme Court, the ITT has decided this rent was part of the section 1015, and there was exempted under Income Tax Act under up to 31st March 2007. After 1/4/2007, there was an amendment. There was a India-Ireland Treaty, and through the treaty here, it is covered under the Article 8 of the treaty. It is not covered as the royalty, because royalty excludes the payment on account of the aircraft here, or payment of rental of the aircraft under the India-Ireland Treaty. Further, it is not covered as an interest. So therefore, it is not be chargeable to tax in India. And since it is not chargeable to tax in India, so therefore, no TDS issue will come into this picture here. So based on these parts, I have summarized all the issues which was framed by the Honorable ITT Special Bench and ITT Bench Special Bench from A to I has summarized the judgment here. Yes, I understand these are the 71 pages long judgment here. I have tried to summarize my best.
The Supreme Court case between Directorate of Income Tax, New Delhi, they were the appellant, and Mitsubishi Corporation. So now we go with the facts of the case. We change the page. Yeah. Facts of the case. In this case, Mitsubishi, it was a non-resident company. It was incorporated in Japan, and it had operations in India. And they were engaged in trading activities of carbon, crude oil, LPG, industry machine, mineral, non-ferrous metals, and all textiles, automobiles. Now, in this case, the department issued notice to Mitsubishi. Notice was issued for the reason that according to department, Mitsubishi's income was attributable to activities in India. According to Mitsubishi, though it was not, but department, according to department, Mitsubishi's activities were taxable in India, some of the activities, according to Article 4, 5, 6 of DTA between India and Japan. So, this SSC, I mean, respondent Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi against this order, though they accepted the order of CIT, accepted the other facts of the case, but they filed appeal with CIT for interest under section 234B, which was levied for non-payment of advance tax. So these were some of the facts. Now, SSC filed appeal with CIT, but CIT dismissed the appeal. Now, aggrieved by the order, this respondent SSC, it files appeal before tribunal also, ITAT. Now, ITAT allowed the appeal and held that respondent is not liable to pay under section 234B when TDS was liable to deduct it. But actually, TDS was not deducted. But still, ITAT allowed this appeal. So we'll go with other facts of the case when we go further. But this judgment of ITAT was challenged by appellant before High Court. Then High Court dismissed the appeals and stick to the judgment of ITAT. Now the department, dissatisfied with the judgment of ITAT and High Court, also filed appeal with Supreme Court. Okay, now what ITAT did, CIT, after the appeal filed by SSC, ITAT appeal was disposed by ITAT by remanding appeals for these years, the years which were in for the case was for. So ITAT asked for remanding the appeals. Now, the CIT, what were the questions of CIT for which they did not allow this appeal? According to them, since TDS was not deducted, therefore, appellant was liable to pay interest under section 234B. TDS was though not deductible, was deductible but not deducted. So therefore, CIT said that interest has to be payable under section 234B. And the second question of CIT was that, tax deduct, whether there was any tax deductible at source from the receipts of the appellant so as to apply the ratio of ITAT decision in appellant's own case. So the facts of this case have to be applied in case of assessment year 2005-06 also. So CIT took note of the order passed by ITAT, and by ITAT, while passing the order, had passed the order based on Motorola Incorporation versus Deputy CIT. In this case of Motorola Incorporation versus Deputy CIT, SSC was not liable to pay advance tax and in consequence interest under section 234B. The reason behind this was SSC was liable to tax deductible at source from his income. Whether it was deducted or not, but he was liable to get the tax deducted. But CIT, ignoring ITAT decision, came to this conclusion: the respondent is liable to pay advance tax in case of no deduction of TDS by payer. Prakash ji, can we go further? And as per department, CIT 234B interest is payable. On this basis, respondent appeal was dismissed by CIT. Now, some of the findings of ITAT also held the same issue was already covered in ITAT's decision based on decisions of Motorola Incorporation for decisions of Uttarakhand High Court and Bombay High Court. Reliance was also placed on judgment of Uttarakhand High Court. And in CIT versus Tidewater Marine International Link, where it was decided that an individual cannot be held liable to pay interest under Section 234B if payer does not deduct TDS or for default of company who had engaged or employed. This was the case of an individual in which on salary TDS was deductible, but since company did not deduct TDS, so deductee was not liable to pay interest under Section 234B. Prakashji, can we go further? Now, in case of Directorate of Income Tax versus NGC Network Asia, it was held that failure to deduct TDS, no interest can be imposed on PESSC under Section 234B. ITAT also observed that in all 7 years, TDS was deductible from payments made to respondent SSC, and respondent was not liable to pay interest under Section 234B. Respondent's appeal was allowed, that they are not liable to pay interest under Section 234B. Prakashji, can we go forward?
Yes, sure.
Now, the question of law framed by High Court was whether interest under Section 234B is leviable for short deduction of TDS. Now, the High Court referred to judgment of Uttarakhand High Court in case of CIT and ANR versus Setco Forex International Drilling Company Limited, judgment of Bombay High Court in NGC Network Asia LLC, and judgment of Madras Court in CIT Tamil Nadu Madras versus Madras Fertilizers to uphold the submission of respondent SSC that TDS should be excluded from consideration while the estimate of income for advanced tax is submitted. So, irrespective of the fact whether the TDS has been deducted or not, Uttarakhand High Court also came to the conclusion that TDS deductible has to be deducted from the tax payable while calculating liability of advanced tax. And 234B interest cannot be levied on that tax part where TDS is on which TDS is deductible, on TDS deductible part. So court also held that interest under Section 234B cannot be imposed when Section 201 provides for consequence of failure to deduct tax at source. So Section 201 also already provides that in case the payer does not deduct TDS or does not pay TDS, in that case, interest has to be levied on the payer and not on the payee. So 234B, so SSC should get the benefit of 234B. Prakashji, can we move? Now, arguments of Revenue Department. Revenue Department argued that obligation of SSC to pay advance tax is independent of obligation to deduct TDS by deductor. Obligation of SSC to pay advance tax continues under Section 190 and 191 of the Act, even in case of non-deduction of tax at source. Interest under Section 234B is compensatory to revenue due to loss in tax recovery. Department's choice of recovery, whether from SSC or payer, should not be restricted. Payment of advance tax is liability of SSC, and any default or shortfall continues to be liability of SSC. So basically, department argues that even if tax is deductible and not deducted, in that case also SSC is liable to pay interest on that part on which tax was deductible and not deducted. So this was the revenue's contention. And further arguments of Revenue Council said that deductible or collected use in 2091D have been mistaken by court. So these words should be read as deducted or collected. Revenue may proceed with collection of unpaid tax and refund to payer or payee, most likely to pay once it is successful in recovering dues. So according to Revenue Council, Revenue has the right to recover tax from either from payer or payee, or they can recover from both, and they can refund the amount to pay once they are able to recover their own dues. So Revenue should have choice regarding mode of recovery. Their revenue's recovery mode should not be restricted. Prakashji. Now, Respondent Council arguments. Respondent Council argued that section 234B should not be read in isolation. This section should be read with section 209. He relied on the judgment of court in case of Ian Patrice Morris versus ACIT. Respondent counsel argued that he submitted that provisions of payment of advance checks and levy of interest for default in payment of advance checks would not come into play once it is determined that TDS was deductible. And he took support of judgments of Uttarakhand High Court in Setco Forex case, Bombay High Court in NGC Network Asia, Madras High Court in Madras Fertilizers to support his view. It was a similar ground. Prakashji, can we go forward? Also, respondent counsel argued that TDS and advances are two different components of recovery. So SSC should not be penalized for default of payer. Payer should be penalized for his default, not the SSC. Now, we can see the relevant sections of this, which were used, section 209, 234, and 200. So, in case you want to read these sections, Prakashji, I mail you relevant extract also.
Yes, yes, you have mailed me also. Shall I display this provision, or can I read this provision and from the Income Tax Act?
You can read these provisions, Prakashji.
Okay, just hold on. Just hold on. I will call the books right now. Just hold on. Sorry.
You can open that PDF also. I forwarded you from the direct.
Yes, sir. Let me read. Let me read. The Income Tax Act लिखा जल्दी से. You want me to read the section 2091D?
Yeah, 2091D.
Or the proviso clause?
Proviso clause that came in Finance Act 2012, but these are all pertinent to prior to 2012.
So I will read the 2091D here.
Yeah.
Okay. And it is already part of the judgment here, it says. 2091D talks about the income tax calculated. Am I audible?
Yeah, Prakash.
Okay. (2091D) talks about 209 is the computation of the advance taxes. The amount of advance tax 2091, the amount of advance tax payable by an SSC in the financial year shall, subject to the provision of subsection 2 and subsection 3, be computed as follows. So the computation mechanism of the advance tax is given under the 209. A, B, C, and D part is very much important because our issue is on the issue section 2019D. It says that income tax calculated under clause A or clause B or clause C, whatever the tax we have calculated for the purpose of advance tax, shall in each case be reduced by the amount of income tax which would be deductible, most important part, deductible and collectible at source during the said financial year under any provision of this act from any income as computed before allowing any deduction admissible under this act, which has been taken into account in computing the current income, or as the case may be the total income aforesaid, and the amount of income tax so reduced shall be the advance tax payable. So it gives that these are the computation of the advance tax which is payable under 2091D. Am I right, ma'am?
Yeah.
Okay. Or shall I read the proviso also, which was introduced subsequently?
I think later you can read.
Okay.
Because so on the basis of these sections, our counsel argued that section 2091 clause A and D, SSC shall make estimate of current income and tax payment of advance 6 on the basis of rates in force. The advance 6 so calculated shall be reduced by tax deductible or collected, and in case failure to pay advance tax is lesser than 90%, the SSC shall be liable to pay interest on the amount of shortfall from the assess tax under section 234B. So his SSC's counsel has this argument that since tax was deductible, so SSC shall deduct this deductible tax amount from his liability, and on the balance amount, he'll pay interest under section 234B if any amount, if any advance tax liability is there. Can we go forward, Prakashji? Now, revenues submissions were like the main emphasis was on phrase deductible or collectible at source, that any person who has received any payment without payer deducting any tax cannot be escaped liability in payment of advance tax and consequent interest for such non-payment under section 191 and 234B of the Act. As the SSC was fully aware of the payments being received without deduction of tax at source, they should not be allowed to rely on section 201 of the Act to reduce advance tax liability. Basically, according to revenue, since SSC knew that tax has not been deducted, though, so he should not be allowed to take benefit of avoiding this liability, and department should not be at loss. So according to revenue, deductible or collectible would include deducted or collected also. Now, in the Finance Bill 2012, there came proviso because of this deductible or collectible words. There came proviso where these which will help in understanding the facts of the case, that department introduced deducted or not introduced deducted, they came with the proviso. So can we read okay, let me just read the memorandum explaining Finance Bill first. Under the existing provisions of 209 of the Income Tax Act, the amount of advance tax payable is computed by reducing the amount of income tax which would be deductible or collectible during the financial year from income tax on estimated income. Therefore, in case where the SSC receives or pays any amount on which the tax was deductible or collectible without deduction or collection of tax, it has been held by courts that he is not liable to advance tax to the extent the tax is deductible or collectible from such amount. In order to make an SSC liable for payment of advance tax in respect of income which has been received or paid without deduction or collection of tax, it is proposed to amend the aforesaid section to provide that where a person has received any income without deduction or collection of tax, he shall be liable to pay advance tax in respect of such income. This amendment will take effect from 1st April 2012 and would accordingly apply in relation to advance tax payable for financial year 12-13 and subsequent financial year. So, on the basis of previous judgments related to this matter, deductible or collectible issues, department came up with this memorandum explaining Finance Bill 2012, and the changes were introduced in this section 209. So, Prakashji, can you read the proviso to section 209?
Yes, section 209, which came from the 209 1D provided proviso clause, which came from the Finance Act 2012, is as under, provided that for computing liability for advance tax, income tax calculated under clause A or clause B or clause C shall not in each case be reduced by the aforesaid amount of income tax which would be deductible or collectible at source during the said financial year under provision of this act from any income if the person responsible for deducting tax has paid or credited such income without deduction of tax, or it has been received or debited by the person responsible for collecting tax without collection of such tax.
So, I mean, these whatever doubts were there prior to 2012, those were clarified by this Finance Act, but obviously from the prospective effect, not for the retrospective. So, for, I mean, deductible or collectible, this issue was resolved by this, by bringing this proviso. Now, the SSC Council further explained, as per the provisions of section 209, SSC shall estimate his current income and income tax for payment of advance tax. the calculation of advance tax to be reduced by tax deductible or collected at source. In case of failure to pay advance tax under Section 208 or where advance tax paid by SSC as per the provisions of Section 210 is less than 90% of assessed tax, the SSC shall be liable to pay interest on the shortfall under Section 234B. So basically, SSC has to calculate his current income and reduce the deductible or collectible tax amount and then calculate tax on the tax advance tax liability and interest under Section 234B if he has deposited less than 90% of the advance tax liability. Can we go forward, Prakash? Further, SSC's counsel also explained there is no reason that Section 234B should be read in isolation without referring to other provisions of Chapter 17. Liability for payment of interest as provided in Section 234B is for default in payment of advance tax. Interest has to be calculated on short payment of tax after taking into account the assessed tax. Therefore, Section 209 related to computation of advance tax payable by SSC cannot be ignored while considering the contents of Section 234B. Prior to 2012, now there was a provision in law to deduct tax collectible or collectible at the time of calculating advance tax liability. So SSC's counsel said that the 234B cannot be read in isolation. So liability is for default in liability for payment of interest in Section 234B is for default in payment of advance tax. So interest has to be calculated on short payment after deducting tax deductible or collectible at source. We cannot, Section 209 cannot be ignored. Also, some of the judgments which supported the case were Madras Fertilizers case, where it was said that revenue is not remedialess and there are no provisions in the Act enabling the revenue to proceed against the payer who has default in deducting tax at source. The provisions have changed with effect from 2012 and SSC cannot reduce tax deductible or collectible while calculating advance tax liability after 2012. The proviso was introduced in Finance Act 2012 is an exception to Section 209(1)(b). So it was clear since proviso was introduced in 2012, all cases prior to that shall read deductible or collectible as deductible or collectible only.
And now the very important question arises when we read the Section 209 and 234B. 209 is for the calculation of the advance tax. 234B is the default if there is a not payment of the advance tax or there is a short payment of the advance tax. So both are linked with the advance tax here. The issue arises here in case where the SSC was supposed to receive some income and on which the tax was deductible, but tax has not been deducted, then earlier the SSC receiving the payment, the payee receiving the payment while calculating the advance tax can reduce the amount of the deductible amount, and after that he can pay the balance amount of his tax, and therefore no interest will be liable here. But and earlier the 201 was also there, where is the if there is a shortfall in the payment of the TDS, there will be some payer will also be liable to this part here. The issue arises here, can on the same default there is a liability on the two person, one on the payer and another in the payee, for the interest under two different provision, payer under 201, payee under 234B, interest is being imposed on the two different person for the same default by the payer. Can this argument be taken that the amendment of the 2012 amendment creates double jeopardy for a same default to the two different person? If it creates double jeopardy for the same default to the two persons, can it be argued on the issue of the constitutionality of this judgment, of this amendment? The first issue that is there. The second issue, which is more practical here, is that in many cases we have seen that AO issue the 197 order or 195 order, which are provisional in nature. Subsequently, when the assessment takes place, the SSC says, AO says, no, your income is taxable at the full rate, and therefore there is a short payment of the TDS by you. Can the AO, can the SSC take a plea that there is a short payment of the TDS is due to the 197 order, so therefore I should not be liable to pay the interest on the shortfall here? There are two questions that we should deliberate here.
Can you repeat Prakash's question once more?
I will ask. Question one is very interesting part here. Prior to 2012, what that you have read this part, that payee was not liable to pay the interest if the TDS was deductible, but it has not been deducted. So therefore, if there is a shortfall in the payment of advance tax, the payee was not liable. The remedy was there under 201, the payer was liable. However, this situation has been changed in 2012. After 2012, with the proviso clause, it has been said that while calculating the advance tax, the payee will also liable with 234B, and the payer is also liable. So the point is that for a same default, the default is by the payer to deposit the TDS or to deduct the TDS. By the same default, can the payee as well as the payer both can be liable for the same default under two different provisions here?
If we go by the act, yes, though it should not be, but if we go simply by the act, then it's there. So, I mean, it can be raised, I mean, it can be argued in court if required, but prima facie, it seems to be.
Charisab has been different view.
No. I will present my view. Discussion.
Yeah.
My view is this. So far as double jeopardy is concerned, it says that for the same thing, the same person shall not be put to trial twice.
Yes.
But here, different persons for two different defaults. So there is no question of constitutionality involved in this matter. But primary responsibility is there. But even under 201, if you take that to fix up the responsibility on the payer, because now that a way is provided that if the payee has declared it in their return, 201 is not attracted. So, because this proviso is provided now, because earlier there was no proviso to 209D. At that time, though, the Honorable Court said that because 201 remedy is available, you don't go against this payee for the interest under 234B. But now that to plug the loophole, now the proviso is provided now. Proviso says that if for any reason there is a default on the part of the payer and you receive the amount along with the tax, declare that amount and you pay the advance tax on that. Here the primary responsibility is with the payer. There is no doubt about it.
Yes.
Law provides that. No. Law provides that if for any reason the payer omits it, and the payer declares it in his computation, that man is absolved because you cannot declare him as a SSC in default.
Yes, sir. I totally agree, sir.
So it has to pass through thresholds. First thing is that whether 201 is exercisable or not. If this man declares it, that is not exercisable. But when this man is declared now that because earlier the law mandates that you please reduce it. Now you say that you receive the tax component also, you please declare it. So then though there is a default under 201, but 209 it attracts the payee.
Yes, sir.
So suppose let us assume a situation in which both of them failed. What will happen?
So there will be an interest on both the party.
No. The moment you proceed against one party, the other party is absolved.
Yes.
The law provides now that there is a proviso. Even that escapes at one particular place, because we go by the last opportunity theory. Who can avoid the mishap? Who has the last opportunity in his hand? The payee has last opportunity in his hand by the proviso under 209D. It's my, because it's my my thought without reflection.
Yes, yes, I agree.
It's always subject to correction.
Yeah.
But what reflects in my mind is this: the last opportunity lies with the payee. So even if there is some slip in the hands of the payer, the payee, knowing it fully well that he has received the interest component also, which was to be deducted, he did not do it. It is for you to declare it. If you don't declare it, you face it.
Okay.
So at that particular point, the payer is absolved. That is how it looks like. But it requires the other view also to be projected so that we can come to a right conclusion. If we go by the last opportunity theory, the payer's liability is attracted.
Yeah, Harpreet Singh. Yes, please.
So 234 would prevail. Interest under section 234 would be leviable upon the recipient. However, if he accepts it, 201(1)(a) interest would not be leviable upon the payer.
That looks like.
Right. Thank you, sir.
No, that looks like, because still there is perplexity, because first time I am hearing this problem today.
Okay.
No, which is why corresponding to the amendment in 209, there is already amendment in 201. So that as long as the pay declares income and pay the tax, then the payer will not have to pay 201(a). And because of the corresponding amendment, then there will not be a case of double jeopardy. Only one person will be paying the interest.
There is no question of double jeopardy as such first. The second thing is that even the revenue is also liable to make good the undue enrichment, if any. Because the state cannot have the undue enrichment.
Yes.
So one has to be proceeded against. Who? If it is declared, 201(1)(a) is absolved. If it is not declared, the payer, the 234(b) comes in, that will be triggered.
So the last resort is on the payee here, and it will be the payee who will be under default here.
Yes.
One question was raised by Mr. Kothari, that is Mitsubishi decision applicable after amendment in law in 2012?
No. Mitsubishi is prior to 2012.
They clearly stated that it is prospective in nature.
Yes. So it is a prior to 2012 here. And there is another question from Nitin Furia. Just read this part.
Yes. So another question from Mr. Nitin Furia is that if there is claim of TDS on income from interest from firm, where assessee is partner, firm was not supposed to deduct tax at source, whether for the purpose of interest under section 234, TDS credit to be considered or not.
So if we understand,
the real test here is whether there is liability to deduct tax or not first. And whether that tax component is received by the payer or not. If both the conditions are satisfied, this proviso triggers. So when there is no liability, automatically the payer is supposed to declare it.
Yes. So it says that firm was not supposed to deduct TDS, whether for the purpose of interest under section 234, TDS credit to be considered or not.
Because if the firm is not liable under law, 209D does not trigger. So straight away that goes to ABC.
Yes.
It is not filtered at D.
Yes, sir. So what is the next issue, and anything on the next question, sir?
No, I think there are only two questions on this issue.
Okay. And
one, how payee would know that payer has not been penalized? Somebody has.
Is there any more question?
Yeah, I saw this question. How payee would know that payer has not been penalized? So obviously payee won't come to know that
Yes. So in the chat box, how payee would know that payer has not been penalized?
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, department can do recovery from both of them. I mean, obviously, nobody will realize whether the other person has also been.
Yes, that is the pertinent question. That's what we were thinking.
Yes. So next point what he has raised is that if the payer has deducted tax at source but not paid, what is the consequence to the payee?
In such cases, what we do in practical life, like earlier, what used to happen, that if we have the copy of Form 16 or 16A, then we used to submit that Form 16. But actually, there is no. But now, since everything is online, there is no such thing. If it's not deposited, he won't be able to issue Form 16A. So, payee will not be able to claim this TDS at all, even if he has deducted and not paid. Then still here also, payee has to bear this tax liability and interest.
And then he has to ask, because tax was deducted from the payments, he has to run after the payees. He has to run after the payer and ask him to revise the tax withholding or quarterly statements and then issue a form because he has already deducted.
When once the payer deducts the tax,
it is the liability.
209 does not, actually that does not come into up. This man is straight away that because he knows how much he received. Whether the tax deducted or source set or not, that will be, he'll be knowing. So in that event, this contingency does not arise at all.
No, contingency arises because how payee can take credit of that tax. That is the problem. Because
in that angle only it is relevant.
Yes, so it's only a business of commercial.
34B.
I'm not going into the complete case, but the case law is very important, very much important to understand how the domicile of a company is being transferred from one jurisdiction to the other jurisdiction. Whether India allows this type of transfer or India does not allow this type of transfer, and under which provision of the DTA such transfer takes place. And this provision is important here. Why this? Because after the domicile into the new jurisdiction, whether this company can be called as a resident of that contracting state, because whether this contracting state is, whether they are liable to pay in that contracting state for the purpose of TT here. So there, in this case of the Asia Satellite, there are two parts of this judgment here. First part is that the company which was registered in the BVI has now migrated to the Mauritius, and without losing his identity or continuation, and this company has been registered as a company in Mauritius. When the company has been registered in Mauritius, so whether the India-Mauritius treaty will apply to this part here, the court going into this ITT, going into the detail of the cases and understand that benefit is being passed on since last 20 years. And this purpose was not for any TT shopping and not for to get any tax benefit. So therefore, they have allowed this part here. But looking into the present situation, if this transaction would have been taken place in the present situation, when we have the GAR, when we have the principal purpose test under the double tax avoidance agreement through the MLI, would this migration would have been possible? Or how the court will, how the revenue will look into these transactions? Whether the revenue will look into the transactions as plain as we have seen in this part? My answer will be most probably no, unless there is an economic sense, unless there is an economic compulsion, or unless there is a regulatory compulsion. Any migration nowadays here will be definitely looked through the prism of the GAR and through the prism of the principal purpose test under the MLI read with DTA. So therefore, simply Seater saying that one company has migrated from the BVI to Mauritius as per the migration law, and the Mauritius has allowed them to be a ongoing company without losing his identity, is very much difficult nowadays, it has taken place since 2 decades earlier. So the issue has not been raised, and the point is that the AO was already allowing the benefit of the Moises Treaty here. But take a case, if this transaction happens today, how the court will look into this part here? When particularly the Moises, the moment the Moises is involved, the department raises their fingers here that say that, look, Moises, they're completely no. And particularly after GAR, particularly after this MLI, how this transaction, how this has to be looked this into. This is the most pertinent question that comes here. India, if the Asia Today case take place today, then how this will be, department will looking into these transactions here. This is the most important thing. Second provision of the in the case is that if they have the P in India, how the attribution on the P has to be done. And if the P has been remunerated on the arm length price based on the Morgan Stanley case and the SET satellite case of the Bombay High Court, it says that no further attribution is required in the hands of the P because it has already been remunerated at the arm length price here. These are the
there is
important
evaluation in that area, according to me.
Yes, sir.
There is a lot of scope for evaluation in that area because because no businessman will conduct business in foreign soil only to maintain, only to remunerate his agent. Agent is a tool through which the business is done and profits are derived. So you have to distinguish between the business and the agent's role in it. Dependent agents, because that is actually Klaus Vogel's the very wonderful concept I have seen in that matter, because the dependent agent is not the dependent agent permanent establishment. That's what they wanted to say.
Yeah.
There are two different things. Dependent agent as an entity, that is a different entity, and which works for their commission. And even if that is paid at arm's length, whether that will take into its fold the profits derived by the foreign business entity, that will have to, because in that judgment actually the court wonderfully, as they have given one illustration also.
Yes, I know, sir.
How much dependent agent derives, and through by making use of it, how much dependent agent permanent establishment derive. Because when only we make distinction between them, what has to be taxed here? Because dependent agent is on this soil and anyhow his income is taxable here. That's not the question of this international taxation, the treaty. What is the subject matter is not the dependent agent's income or whether he is paid at arm's length or not. The question is, what are the attributable profits that are derived by the dependent agency permanent establishment? Unless and until we see the distinction between these two, perhaps the concept is very hazy. And law, according to me, there is a lot of scope in this area to evolve.
I totally agree with you, sir. The term dependent agent is much different than the dependent agent P. Dependent agent can be called as a resident of India, where the dependent P will be a non-resident, always a non-resident, because he is representing the non-resident here. So therefore,
that is the virtual projection of the foreign entity.
Yes. So in this case of the DAPE, it is the foreign company which is taxed through this agent here, where in the case of the dependent agent, only the resident person is being taxed here, where the foreign company is not taxed here. So I totally agree with you